ಆಕಾಶವಾಣಿ ಮಂಗಳೂರು.
ಬಾನುಲಿ ಶಾಲೆ ಬಾನತರಂಗದ ಶಾಲೆ, ಕಲಿಕೆಯ ಶಾಲೆ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಗಂಗೆಯ ಶಾಲೆ.
ಬಾನುಲಿ ಶಾಲೆ SSLC ಪರೀಕ್ಷಾ ಸಿದ್ಧತೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ. ಇಂದಿನ ವಿಷಯ ಪ್ರಥಮ ಭಾಷೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್. ಭಾಗವಹಿಸುವವರು ಶ್ರೀಮತಿ ಮೋಲಿ ಲೋಬೋ, ಸೈಂಟ್ ಜೋಸೆಫ್ ಪ್ರೌಢಶಾಲೆ ಬಜ್ಪೆ, ಮಂಗಳೂರು.
ತಿಳಿಯೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಗೆಳೆಯರೇ, ಕಲಿಯೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಗೆಳೆಯರೇ.
Dear students, a very good morning to you all. Hope everything is fine with you, and I'm sure that you have enjoyed the sessions conducted by Sister Lydia. Today, let us discuss the lessons and poems from part 2. We have 5 lessons in prose and 5 poems in poetry section and 1 non-detailed lesson. To begin with the 6th lesson, The Eyes Are Not Here, written by Ruskin Bond. The story is about a train journey of 2 people, both of whom are blind, but they don't reveal their blindness to each other. Up to Rohana, the narrator was alone in the compartment when a girl got inside. Once the train left the station, the narrator started a conversation asking if she too was going to Dehra. The voice startled her as she thought she was alone in the compartment. The girl told him that she was going to Saharanpur, where her aunt would take her home. She also envied the narrator as the hills of Missouri, where he was headed to, presented a lovely sight in October. After some time, the narrator, who was blind, told her quite daringly that she had an interesting face. The girl was happy at this and replied that it was indeed a welcome deviation from the often repeated "you have a pretty face" phrase. Soon it was time for the girl to bid goodbye as the train arrived at a destination. Then the narrator heard a commotion near the door of the carriage and heard a man apologizing. The man entered the compartment and sat before the narrator and apologized for not being as attractive a traveling companion as his predecessor. The narrator asked the fellow traveler if the girl had her hair long and or short, and he replied that he had not noticed her hair but only her eyes, which were so beautiful but were of no use to her, as she was completely blind. Type of questions from the lesson: 1, 2 and 3 marks questions. Reference to the context. Some of the sentences. Are you going all the way to Dehra? Then I had better not to be too familiar. I didn't know anyone else was here. Once again, I had a game to play, a new fellow traveler. Thank goodness it's a short journey. Ants are usually formidable creatures. Oh, how lucky you are. Yes, October is the best time. You have an interesting face. You are a gallant young man. Can you tell me, did she keep her hair long or short? She had beautiful eyes, but they were of no use. She was an interesting girl. Questions. Why did the narrator feel that he would never be able to discover something about the girl's looks? What did the narrator infer when the girl was startled by his voice? The story ends with the revelation. What is the revelation? Give instances to show that the narrator tried his best to impress on her that he could see during his encounter with the girl. How did the narrator describe Missouri in October? Why did the narrator say that the girl had an interesting face? What contrast does the narrator say about people with eyesight and people without? Let us move on to the next lesson. The Girl Who Was Anne Frank, written by Louis Dejong. About the lesson. It is a biography of a girl called Anne Frank who wrote about her experiences in the annex and concentration camp under Hitler's Nazi regime. Her diary became world famous after her death. Anne Frank was the second daughter of Otto Frank, a banker living in Germany. In the autumn of 1933, when Hitler was issuing decrees against Jews, Otto Frank decided to immigrate to Netherlands. He started a small business in Amsterdam, and though not a brilliant student, was a very emotional and strong-willed human being. When Nazis invaded Netherlands in May 1940, the Franks were trapped. They hid in a few derelict rooms on the upper floors of his office called the Annex, made ready to secretly to house. There were 800 people. Any sound, any light might betray their presence. When they were in hiding, Anne began to write her diary. She wrote about the life in the Annex with all its tensions and quarrels, but the diary was a wonderfully delicate record of adolescence. Her diary reveals the trust she had on her father and her sorrow that her mother did not understand her. She hid her diaries in her father's briefcase and he read them only after her death. Nazi policemen found out their hideouts and forcibly took away their jewels and were arrested and taken to the Nazi death camp in Auschwitz in southern Poland. Here, the Nazis separated Otto Frank from his family, and later in the women's camp, Mrs. Frank died from exhaustion. Anne and her sister became pitifully weak and had skeleton-like body and died in early March 1945. Her father was freed early in 1945 by the Russians and he returned to the liberated Amsterdam. There he realized that all his family members were dead. Miep, his former typist, gave him Anne's diaries, which she had safeguarded. He broke down several times while reading the diary. He copied parts of it and gave it to a close friend who lent it to a professor of modern history. He wanted this diary to be published, and one publisher finally accepted it, and it sold more than 150,000 copies. Later editions followed in Britain, Japan, and USA. A lot of people wrote to Otto Frank. Numerous others sent small presents. The care of his daughter's diary became his passion and mission. Her story was made into a play, and when it was staged in Germany, packed audiences saw the tragedy in silent remorse. Anne's diary succeeded where Germany's post-war administrators had failed to make the people feel the senseless and criminal nature of the Nazi regime. The people of Berlin chose her name to symbolize the spirit of racial and social tolerance. Anne's brief life carries the message of courage and tolerance all over the world. She lives even after her death. Type of questions: 2, 3 and 4 marks and reference to the context. Some questions which are important. Give examples to prove the popularity of Anne Frank's diary. Why did Otto Frank decide to migrate to Netherlands? What qualities of Mr. Frank did his staff admire? Where did Otto Frank and others hide themselves? What helped the hiding party to establish contact with the outside world? What did Anne Frank record in her diary? How did Anne Frank compare herself to a songbird? Why does the writer call Anne a courageous leader? How did the German audience respond to the tragic play of Anne Frank? How did the diary of Anne Frank succeed where German administrators had failed? How did Anne's diary open the eyes of Germans to the viciousness of racial persecution? What glimpses of Nazi cruelty do you see in this write-up? Reference to the context. I have read Anne Frank's diary. She was a real problem child, a great talker and fond of nice clothes. Where are your money and jewels? Oh, look, their eyes. Sometimes I do not know where myself begin and Anne Frank ends. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I was a good Nazi but never knew what it meant until the other night. Lesson 8. A Village Cricket Match by A.J. McDonnell. About the lesson. It is a humorous article about a local cricket match. It is taken from the novel England, Their England. The novel narrates the amusing experiences of a young Scottish novelist who travels about in England in order to collect data for a book which he intends to write about the English. All kinds of strange and unconventional behaviors and activities are exhibited during the match. One ball went fast like a bullet, resulting in 4 byes. Another ball went over, hit directly the stomach of Boone, who howled in pain. In this manner, the game moves on with a series of mishaps and confusions and finally ends in a tie. Later, both teams go to an inn to have a good drink and return to their homes. Type of questions: 1, 2, 3 and 4 marks. Why didn't Sexton and the postman take a run when it was possible? How does the writer take a dig at the government officials? How did Mr. Pollock finally catch the ball? The approach of Sexton, the postman, the blacksmith and the baker to the game is typical of their profession. Elaborate. How does the uncertainty and disorganization among the ranks of the invaders add to the humor? Write a short note on the status quo episode. What was happening in the terrestrial sphere when the ball was high on the air? Lesson 9. Consumerist Culture by Cherian Alexander. About the lesson. The lesson is an essay on the mindless consumption that characterizes our lives in the globalized 21st century. The people of this century have become mindless consumption maniacs, buying merchandise that is absolutely useless to human health and happiness. Nowadays, artificially flavored and colored water having absolutely no nutritive value is sold in billions, but we hardly find drinks like tender coconut or buttermilk having the same salability. The situation is same with food items, cosmetics, fashion wear, etc. We have sleek luxury cars, but the roads are bad. We have luxury resorts, but no public parks and playgrounds. People should know when it is necessary to say enough because money is not needed to buy even one necessity of soul. We have to hope and wish that humanity wakes up to stop the damage caused by excessive consumerism, lest the people shop till they drop and nothing of value is left standing in our beloved Mother Earth. Questions. What does the phrase shop till you drop mean? What is the success story of Pepsi on Coca-Cola? What does an advertisement aim to do? What thrills the present-day Indian shoppers? What was the dream come true for the US returned Indian? What are the advertisers and marketing professionals working hard at? How will it affect our villages? What, according to the writer, is the only way to restore sanity? Man today is an unstoppable buying machine. Elucidate with examples. Lesson 10. The Pie and the Tart, written by Hugh Chesterman. About the lesson. It is a humorous play in which two hungry beggars outwit a baker and his wife and take away the pie and the tart from the bakery in Paris in the 15th century. Characters. Pierre and Jean, who are vagabonds. Gaultier, a pastry cook. Marion, his wife. Jean and Pierre, two beggars who are roaming on the streets of Paris. The play depicts the humorous life in France at that time. Jean and Pierre are starving and plan to get food by begging. They go to different streets to beg and Jean knocks on the door of Gaultier's bakery shop, but the baker sends him away. Jean overhears Gaultier mentioning an eel pie, which he wanted someone to take to the mayor. After the baker goes away, Jean asks Pierre to go and ask for the pie in the manner Gaultier had mentioned. He gets the pie and both of them eat it happily. Then they want the tart Pierre had seen on the shelf in Gaultier's house. Jean goes to ask for it and gets beaten up by Gaultier. He utters a lie and comes back to Pierre. He sends Pierre, who is also threatened with the beatings, but very cleverly lies and manages to take the tart. Both of them eat the tart happily. Type of questions. 1. 2 marks. Reference to the context of 3 marks. Some important questions. Why was Pierre pinched? How did he defend himself before Judge Gaston? What, according to Pierre, is a sure sign of starvation? What details of conversation between the baker and his wife help Jean in his planning? Why does Jean ask Pierre to get the pie instead of taking himself? How was Marion going to identify Gaultier's messenger? Why does Pierre think he was dreaming? Does Jean get the tart? What happens to him? Why? Why did Jean lie to Pierre and send him to fetch the tart? How do Pierre and Jean describe eel pie? Reference to the context. Well, Your Honour, I must leave. Madame Gaultier's hand is not for everyone to kiss. If you are not back with the pie, I will have you both hanged for thieving. I really don't see the necessity. Well, choose a good-looking one. I'm not lovesick. I'm starving. It was the work of an artist. Students, please note, annotations can be asked on any sentence in this lesson. Please read the lesson thoroughly. Poetry section. 6th poem, Sonnet 73, That Time of the Year, by William Shakespeare. It is one of the most famous sonnets written by William Shakespeare, which focuses upon the theme of old age. This poem is about the man who is at the evening of his life. He compares his age with the time of year before winter, when very few leaves hang on the boughs and the warbling birds also have exited from the tree. He then states a comparison of his aging to a sunset which is almost fading away in the west, which will soon be extinguished by black night, which can be called death's second self, as it closes up everyone in the sleep. He says that in him one can see the glowing embers that lie upon the ashes remaining from the flame of his youth. It will die on the deathbed, consumed by that which once fed it. If his friend is able to sense this, it will make his love more determined, causing him to love the poet who will leave this world before long. Type of questions. 2 and 3 marks and reference to the context of 3 marks. Questions. What is referred to as death's second self? When does love become stronger? The poem is about the stage of life in which the poet imagines himself to be. What stage does he imagine himself to be in? The next poem is The Stolen Boat, written by William Wordsworth. About the poem The Stolen Boat is an extract taken from Wordsworth's long autobiographical poem. The Stolen Boat is related to one memorable incident in the poet's childhood. He describes that one summer evening, led by the promptings of nature, he found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cave where it was usually tied. The poet had stealthily taken a boat from its mooring place and had gone rowing in the lake. He was both anxious and excited, anxious because of his act of stealth and excited because of rowing. But the inherent guilt inside him made nature look very menacing and threatening, and the mountain which loomed before him looked large and as if it was following him. So he became very much afraid and quickly returned to the mooring place and tied the boat back. Even days after the incident, he is haunted by the mysterious shapes and images. The dominant emotion of the boat experience recollected by the poet is fear and guilt. Type of questions 2, 3 and 4 marks and reference to the context of 3 marks. Questions. Learn all the 1 mark and 2 mark question answer. Other questions. What stealthy act does the boy commit? Why does Wordsworth say that his moving the boat was an act of stealth? Why was he guilty of his act? Describe the effect that the spectacle of the peak had on the poet's mind. Describe the scene as the poet began rowing. Reference to the context. Leaving behind a still on either side, small circles glittering tidy in the moon. My boat went heaving through the water like a swan. There hung darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. Poem 8, Mending Wall by Robert Frost. About the poem. A stone wall separates the speaker's property from his neighbors. The speaker muses at the beginning of the poem that there must be something that doesn't love a wall, referring to the forces of nature that bring a wall to decay and require it to be repaired and rebuilt. In spring, the two neighbors meet to walk along the wall, each on his own side, and replace the rocks that have been displaced during the previous year. The speaker sees no reason for the wall to be retained. There are no cows to be contained, just apple and pine trees. He does not believe in erecting walks just for the sake of it, but his neighbor resorts to an old saying that good fences make good neighbors. The speaker remains unconvinced and humorously tells his neighbor to look beyond the old-fashioned folly of such reasoning. He says that neither his apple trees nor his neighbor's pine trees are likely to encroach on the other's property. He wants to know whether they are walling in or walling out, but his neighbor is not swayed at all, and the speaker feels that his neighbor must be someone from an old and outdated era, a living example of dark age mentality. Though the speaker tries to tell him the importance of not having any walls, his neighbor simply says, good fences make good neighbors. Thus we realize that the speaker is philosophical, amiable, and wants to have a friendly relationship with his neighbor, whereas the neighbor wants his privacy and space. Though mending the wall is a pointless act because it gets damaged again and again, his neighbor does it with all seriousness. Type of questions 2 marks, 3 marks and 4, and reference to the context. How does nature disturb the stones on the wall? How do hunters disturb the stones on the wall? When does the mending of the wall take place? What argument does the speaker give to convince his neighbor that they do not need the wall? How does the neighbor carrying a stone in each hand appear to the poet? Poem 9, Bajpe by Torudutt. About the poem. It is the story of Ekalavya taken from the great epic, the Mahabharata. It speaks of the devotion Bajpe or Ekalavya had towards whom he respects and considers as his teacher, even though Dronacharya had refused to take him as his student. Bajpe, written by Torudutt, is a ballad based on the legend of Ekalavya, which is found in the Mahabharata. It tells the tale of how a humble forest youth becomes a self-taught master archer after he was rejected and humiliated by the great teacher and warrior Dronacharya. Despite this snub, Bajpe retains his devotion towards his master, makes a statue of him and learns archery by himself in front of the statue. He comes and shows his prowess to Dronacharya, who demands a payment as his charge. Bajpe agrees to give anything that he asks. Drona asks him for his right hand thumb, as he wants only Arjuna to be the greatest archer in the world. Bhattu unhesitatingly gives his right thumb to prove his devotion to his master. Drona is humbled at the devotion shown to him and blesses him that his fame shall spread from one end to the other end, and his name will be linked with self-help, truth and modesty. Type of questions: 2, 3 and 4 marks. Reference to the context: 3 marks. Questions: why had Bhattu gone to Dronacharya? How did Drona respond to Bhattu's request? Why did Bhattu revere Drona as his master? What did Drona seek from Bhattu as recompense? Why? What justification did Drona give for his unfair demand? And also learn summary. Reference to the context. There are many lines which can be asked. Some of them are: if I am your master, now thou hast finished thy course, give me my due. Thou art my master, ask. Lo, all my inspiration here and all my knowledge is from thee. Let me but know thy gracious will. Is it a promise? Rash promises ever ends in strife. Fame shall sound thy praise from sea to sea. The last poem, CLM, written by John Masefield. About the poem. This poem, written by John Masefield, is a dedication to his mother, who died while giving birth to her sixth child, his sister Nora. CLM is the shortened form of Caroline L. Masefield, his mother's name. The poet John Masefield has expressed his love for his mother in this poem. The poem begins by explaining how mother gave him life and died, and it continues to explain how he expresses grief for his mother, cannot see him grown up and cannot see how his son has lived his life. He says that even if death could be undone and his mother be reincarnated, it would be of no use because they would not recognize each other. He then thinks about all the sufferings mother undergoes while bearing a child and when in labor. He concludes the poem with more feeling of guilt, for he thinks he has not repaid the favor of living up to his mother's desires and to that of women in general. The poet thinks that, being a man, he is also to be blamed for the fact that men are considered superior to women, for he has not done anything about it. He expresses concern over the inequality of genders. The tone of the poem is serious and grave and makes us think about the way we treat women in our society. Type of questions: 2, 3 and 4 marks, and also reference to the context of 3 marks. Questions: why does the poet want the grave to keep shut? Summarize the poem CLM. What can the poet's mother not see from the grave? What has John Masefield done for his mother? Why will be the poet's mother not recognize him if she meets him now? Reference to the context. My mother's life made me a man. Her beauty fed my common earth. She would not know her little son. Men triumph over women still. O grave, keep shut, lest I be shamed. Students, we have discussed 5 lessons and 5 poems from part 2. Let us discuss about the grammar part in next session. Thank you.
ಬಾನುಲಿ ಶಾಲೆ ಬಾನತರಂಗದ ಶಾಲೆ ಕಲಿಕೆಯ ಶಾಲೆ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಗಂಗೆಯ ಶಾಲೆ.
ಇದುವರೆಗೆ ಬಾನುಲಿ ಶಾಲೆ ಎಸ್ಎಸ್ಎಲ್ಸಿ ಪರೀಕ್ಷಾ ಸಿದ್ಧತೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಥಮ ಭಾಷೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಕುರಿತಾಗಿ ಮಾಹಿತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿದಿರಿ. ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದವರು ಶ್ರೀಮತಿ ಮೋಲಿ ಲೋಬೋ, ಸೈಂಟ್ ಜೋಸೆಫ್ ಪ್ರೌಢಶಾಲೆ ಬಜ್ಪೆ, ಮಂಗಳೂರು. ನಾಳೆ ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಭಾಗ 2 ಪ್ರಸಾರವಾಗಲಿದೆ.
ಕಲಿಯೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ ಗೆಳೆಯರೇ, ತಿಳಿಯೋಣ ಬನ್ನಿ